Confused by modern dating terms?
Master the slang with Speed Mingle.
45 minutes to reply to a text that took you, what, 3 seconds to read?
Exactly. You pretend you don't really mind if Friday plans are left entirely up in the air until, like, Thursday night. For decades, the unwritten rule of modern dating has been that whoever shows the least emotion holds all the power.
It's an exhausting, cynical game of emotional chicken. And honestly, for single professionals seeking meaningful relationships, it's a leading cause of the modern loneliness epidemic.
It really is. But there is a massive cultural rebellion happening right now. People are just so exhausted by the ambiguous situationship, and they're turning to a philosophy called Chalance, which is, the exact literal opposite of nonchalance.
The shift in behavior is completely undeniable, too. If we look at the recent data, the dating app Hinge reported a massive 217% increase in searches for the term chalant. Singles are explicitly writing in their profiles that they want someone to, quote, chalant them down.
Wow, chalant them down. That's so direct.
Yeah, they are demanding upfront enthusiasm, but the problem, however, is the psychological reality of what happens when you completely drop your armor. So today, we are asking a very specific question.
Right. Does dating with chalance, practicing radical vulnerability and immediate open enthusiasm, actually create better romantic matches? Or does it merely increase a person's risk of profound rejection, emotional manipulation, and dating burnout?
I will be arguing that while abandoning those emotional barriers sounds incredibly healthy in theory, doing so prematurely exposes daters to excessive vulnerability. It's really just a fast track to emotional exhaustion.
And I will be arguing that chalance is a necessary, empowering filter. It reclaims your personal agency in a dating culture that has been paralyzed by apathy, and it demands the bare minimum effort required to build a real connection.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on what that emotional exhaustion actually looks like, because I think Chalance kind of assumes this utopian dating environment.
How so?
Well, it assumes a world where everyone is securely attached and acting in good faith, but the clinical reality is far more dangerous. Psychology Today recently analyzed this exact dynamic of dropping boundaries too quickly, and the results weren't great.
Okay, what did they find?
They noted that excessive vulnerability can lead to a person being valued, as they put it, like a Happy Meal, or, stepped on like a shag carpet.
A Happy Meal? That is bleak.
Right? But we have to explain why that devaluation happens. Human psychology is wired to value what is earned. When you bypass the natural evolutionary pacing of human connection and offer total transparency immediately, it often triggers a subconscious alarm.
I mean, I hear you, but we've spent years in this culture deeply confusing emotional unavailability with confidence. Dating coach Amy Chan, the author of Unsingle, makes a brilliant point about this.
Oh, I'm familiar with her work, yeah.
She argues that hiding behind a shield of indifference isn't strength. It is fundamentally weak. It's just a defense mechanism to avoid the vulnerability of being truly seen.
But doesn't that radical transparency signal a lack of internal boundaries? Especially for daters who are insecurely attached, abandoning traditional pacing invites severe emotional manipulation.
While practicing chalance isn't about overwhelming a stranger with your deepest traumas on date one, it's about what Chan calls private displays of consistency. It means active planning and sending the first text without analyzing the power dynamic.
Okay, but it leaves insecure daters exposed to toxic behaviors like love bomb, right? Where a manipulative partner just mirrors that immediate enthusiasm to gain control. You can't strip away someone's protective armor and send them into the dating market without expecting casualties.
But that assumes the current armor is actually protecting us rather than just suffocating us. Let's look at the philosophy of why this shift is happening. Relationship expert Esther Perel has observed that we are currently experiencing a massive pendulum swing.
Away from situationships, you mean?
Exactly. We are moving away from the era of vague situationships and swinging violently toward a desire for stability and predictability. Daters are literally reclaiming the vocabulary to look someone in the eye and say, "You matter to me."
I come at it from a different way, because we need to ask who actually has the psychological bandwidth to break that stalemate safely. To safely execute chalance, A person requires an incredibly robust, almost impenetrable psychological foundation.
I'm not sure I agree it requires an impenetrable foundation. It just requires basic honesty.
Well, even Amy Chan points out that seeing through manipulation games like the love bombing I mentioned requires high self-worth. She notes that when you have built a full life and genuine self-love, hot and cold behavior stops being intriguing.
Right. The dopamine loop of intermittent reinforcement breaks. The inconsistency becomes a turnoff.
Exactly. But let's be honest about the target audience here. We're talking about single professionals, high-achieving, stressed individuals who often tie their value to external validation.
Sure, dating is inherently stressful for that demographic.
But what about the millions of daters who haven't yet reached that level of Zen-like self-worth? If you have an anxious attachment style, lowering your shields immediately is reckless. You are walking into a battlefield without a vest.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. You are talking about Chalance as if it's this reckless exposure of the soul. But in practical application, it is highly structured. Experts are calling this micro-intentionality.
Micro-intentionality. What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, it means throwing out the outdated 3-day rule. It means zero response games. If you look at your phone and you are free, you just text back.
Okay, so it's mostly about logistical honesty then?
Yes, exactly. Instead of the purposely vague, we should hang out sometime, a Chalance dater says, let's grab dinner Friday at 7, I'll make a reservation. Let's contrast that with the traditional nonchalant approach.
Which is what, exactly? Playing hard to get?
To borrow a brilliant, absurd analogy from Psychology Today, to treat yourself like William Shatner's kidney stone.
Wait, William Shatner's kidney stone?
Yeah, which apparently sold for $25,000. That is the mechanism of manufactured scarcity. You make yourself seem rare and valuable by withholding access.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that pacing yourself is automatically manufactured scarcity. There is a vast psychological difference between playing a manipulative game and having healthy, protective boundaries.
But isn't pacing often just an excuse to avoid showing real interest?
No, pacing is how the human nervous system establishes somatic safety. Trust is built gradually through reciprocal small interactions. And frankly, the lines between all these new Gen Z dating trends are getting incredibly blurry, which makes application dangerous.
You mean trends like goblin-simacy and wildflowering?
Exactly. Wildflowering is letting a relationship bloom with no direction. And goblin-simacy is about showing up completely unfiltered, bringing all your flaws and your sweatpants to date one to eliminate artifice.
Right, but those are distinct from Chalance.
Theoretically, yes. Chalance requires structured, proactive effort, but in practice, the line between Chalance and goblin-simacy is paper-thin for most people. Immediate enthusiasm can so easily devolve into oversharing and trauma dumping under the guise of being authentic.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, mostly because the source material explicitly distinguishes the mechanisms behind these trends. Goblin intimacy frequently excuses low-effort behavior. Chalance is the exact opposite of low effort.
But doesn't it still rush the natural progression of intimacy?
Not at all. Damona Hoffman, the author of F the Fairy Tale, makes a crucial point here. She says that for years, people have dated from the perspective of trying to be liked. The apps have gamified romance into a popularity contest.
Absolutely. We're all just chasing likes on an algorithm.
Right. We contort ourselves to be whatever the other person wants. Chalance reclaims agency because you completely flip the script. You aren't passively waiting in a state of high anxiety to see if they like you. You are actively deciding if this person aligns with your needs.
But let me ask you a pointed question regarding Damona Hoffman's application of this. Doesn't immediate, radical transparency artificially rush intimacy in a way that creates false negatives?
What do you mean by false negatives?
Well, we know from developmental psychology that not everyone warms up at the same speed. If you show up on date one saying, I am entirely invested in this, let's lock down plans, aren't you risking scaring off naturally cautious partners?
I see why you think that, but Chalance doesn't mean demanding a marriage proposal on date 2. We have to separate enthusiasm from pressure.
But you might be mislabeling their normal, healthy pacing as emotional unavailability. A slow-to-warm-up partner isn't necessarily playing a mind game. They might just be assessing their own safety before matching your high energy.
Sure, but expressing interest clearly shouldn't dysregulate a stable person's nervous system. It means ending a date by saying, I had a great time tonight and I'd like to see you again. rather than waiting 3 days to send the cryptic emoji.
I agree, the cryptic emoji is terrible.
Right. And if simply saying, I want to see you again scares them off, they are probably not emotionally available for a serious, committed relationship. That is the exact mechanism of the filter. You are filtering out the people who are terrified of basic human enthusiasm.
And that brings us to the psychological toll of that exact binary outcome.
Yes, saving time is valuable. I completely agree that the ambiguity of a situationship is deeply draining.
It is.
You save yourself weeks, sometimes months of cognitive dissonance and guessing.
True, but humans are not algorithms. We are emotionally fragile creatures with finite reserves of resilience. The cost of your highly efficient filter is the emotional toll of frequent, blunt, undeniable rejections.
Well, rejection is just part of dating, isn't it?
It is. But when you are constantly putting your authentic self out there and you are repeatedly met with people who find it too much, that causes severe dating fatigue of its own. For high-achieving professionals, constantly exposing their unarmored hearts is unsustainable.
I would argue the pain of a quick, clean rejection is far less damaging to a person's long-term mental health than the slow, agonizing drain of a 6-month situationship.
So you think trading ambiguity for blunt rejection is an upgrade?
Absolutely. Think about the psychological cost of suppressing your own needs just to appear cool for half a year. When you pretend you don't care, you abandon yourself. Protecting your ego with nonchalance has a massive compounding cost to your self-esteem.
I completely agree that suppressing your core needs is deeply damaging. Self-abandonment is a very real crisis in modern dating.
Exactly. Chalance forces you to accept that caring about another human being is inherently risky. You cannot selectively numb your emotions. If you numb the fear of rejection with nonchalance, you also numb the capacity for deep intimacy.
My concern remains that Chalance, as a sweeping cultural trend, doesn't adequately account for the varying levels of emotional resilience among daters. It is a beautiful philosophy, but it is designed for the emotionally elite.
The emotionally elite?
Yes, those who can brush off a direct rejection because their self-worth is entirely internally validated. For the average dater, treating every interaction with open investment is a recipe for emotional depletion.
So you think nonchalance is still necessary?
I think, practically speaking, a little bit of protective nonchalance, a measured, cautious pacing, is a necessary shock absorber. It is how we survive the brutal mechanics of the modern dating market without losing our minds.
Well, as we bring this discussion to a close, let's summarize where our arguments have landed today. My position remains that Chalance is a brave, deeply necessary evolution in modern romance.
And it certainly demands baseline effort. I'll give you that.
It does. It actively fixes the stagnation by demanding emotional availability. It's a direct rejection of the superficial games and the manufactured scarcity that have kept people isolated. By acting as a powerful upfront filter, it trades exhausting ambiguity for clarity.
And my summary is that while transparency and intentionality are worthy goals, the Chalance philosophy severely underestimates the psychological risks. It's a strategy that requires an almost impenetrable sense of self-worth to execute safely.
Because of the risk of bad actors?
Yes, abandoning traditional protections will invite manipulation from bad actors, blur the lines into oversharing, and ultimately accelerate dating fatigue by exposing daters to constant, blunt rejections.
Yet, despite our fundamental disagreement on the risks, we have found significant convergence today. We both agree that the era of the ambiguous situationship and the cool facade is dead.
We absolutely agree on that. It is fundamentally detrimental to long-term connection. The traditional advice of treating yourself like a limited edition commodity is outdated and manipulative.
Right. Where we fundamentally diverge is on the cure. We disagree on whether radical, immediate enthusiasm is the most sustainable way forward.
Or if a more measured, protective pacing is required to navigate modern romance while protecting your nervous system.
It really highlights the incredible complexity of modern dating. Shifting generational boundaries are continually redefining how we seek connection, and there are so many more nuances to explore in this material, from clinical therapeutic contexts to broader social implications.
Indeed, navigating this landscape requires an incredibly careful balancing act between opening yourself up to love and protecting your psychological well-being.
So to the single professionals listening today, The next time you sit across the table from someone looking at your cards, you have a choice to make. You can keep your hand hidden, guard your ego, and ensure you never lose, but also guarantee you never really connect.
Or you can drop the nonchalance, lay your cards face up, and risk the rejection for the chance at something real.
Exactly. Whether you are ready to play it warm is entirely up to you. Thank you for joining us on this exploration, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening.
And watching on the new Speed Mingle TV network.